Okay, students, this is the first time I've done a screencast, so bear with me. I think I've got all my windows up. So what I'm going to do is just walk you through how to put together one of these essays. I did a lecture on it today, and I'm about to share that when I'm done here through a class announcement, just in case you weren't able to watch the lecture or you weren't in my Comp 1 class on Thursdays. But this is going to supplement the lecture. So this is me just going step by step through how I want you to analyze the rhetoric of a writer or a speaker. So I picked this topic, is goth dead, because I figured that's a topic nobody's going to write on. Plus, it kind of made me laugh when I saw this guy's picture. Um, but what I want to do is go back to week 4, assignment 2, where I first gave you the assignment. So we'd been studying ethos, pathos, and logos. You all know what that is pretty thoroughly by now. And then I gave you this example to look at. Some of you did. That was awesome. And then here below, you see the assignment description. Be 500 words minimum, 800 words maximum. That was for draft 1. Of course, at the point we're at now, we're in the 3rd draft. So you can go beyond the 800 word maximum. Exhibit the use of at least 3 of your vocabulary words properly utilized and underlined where they appear. Not that many people did that, so make sure that if you have not done that, that you do this in the final draft of your essay or it will count off. Use proper syntax. That's just a note about the sentence structure. Most of you are pretty good on that, and I'm not terribly worried. And then your essay has to address pathos, ethos, and logos. So what emotional appeals does the writer or speaker make? How do they establish his or her credibility? And what's the structure of their logic, which was today's lecture. We went over that. So I'm going to cover this material again, but with a different speech. Okay, so that was the very first assignment, and that was week 4, assignment 2 over here under your assignments tab. Then, week 5, assignment 1 was the follow-up, and this was about the analytical body paragraph. And a lot of people were a bit confused about this. I know it's a more complex structure, but I wanted you to include at least one analytical body paragraph in your papers. And what this is at minimum, it's a 5-sentence paragraph, and I would actually like you to kind of stick to the 5-sentence structure the first time you try it. But sentence 1 is the claim of your paragraph. So it's the main statement of your paragraph. It's the thing that the rest of the paragraph is about. Sentence 2 is your evidence sentence, and I'll scroll down here in a minute, but we talked about the structure of these sentences. So this is where you introduce evidence to support your claim, and you have to do it by nesting your quotes and then discussing your quotes. And then I'll show you that again here in a second. We won't cover that a lot because I've already covered it in class. The 3rd sentence, you then analyze the evidence, and all that means is you elaborate on it in such a way that you've clearly connected it to the claim. Okay, that's all analysis means there. You're elaborating on the evidence in such a way that you are connecting it clearly to the claim. It's like, this is why this evidence supports my claim. Earlier, when I first lectured on this, I called this looking for the warrant, or spelling out the warrant for your evidence. And that just means you're telling me how it's relevant to the claim. Sentence number 4 is the second piece of evidence, and it'll look just like sentence number 2 in terms of structure. It'll be a nested quote. And then sentence number 5, again, you're analyzing the second piece of evidence, which means, again, that you are tying the relevance of this evidence directly to the claim. Okay, so that's the analytical body paragraph in a nutshell, 5 sentences. So when I'm looking for it, I should be looking for a 5-sentence paragraph that has these features. So then I gave you these. I'm not going to take a ton of time again because this is there for you to look at under week 5, assignment 1. But I gave you these examples of what an analytical body paragraph looks like. So this is a 5-sentence paragraph. You see, claim atheism requires more faith than traditional religious belief. Evidence has the squiggly line here underneath it. That's part of it anyway. The rest of the squiggly line is where it ends. This may be surprising to some atheists who feel that, quote, having faith in a God seems a step beyond the evidence, end quote. But this is precisely the argument of Christian philosopher Norman Geisler. And then you see I've got the in-text citation in parentheses after Geisler, so at the end of my sentence, and then the period goes after my in-text citation. So that's claim and evidence. So now we have an analysis sentence. On the contrary, traditional Christian belief has had a 2,000-year affair with reason and evidence, whereas atheism is built on baseless assertions. So that's analyzing. In other words, it's elaborating on the evidence in such a way as to connect it to that first claim. Now that's just the first, that's the first 3 moves put together. That's claim, evidence, analysis. To turn this into an analytical body paragraph, you need one more evidence sentence and one more analysis sentence. So I gave you an example of that. Let me scroll down here. So this is a complete analytical body paragraph. Claim, evidence analysis, evidence analysis. I'm not going to reread it for you because you can read it there, and we've already gone over it, so I'm just reminding you that it's there. So this, I think, is the tricky thing, is inserting the analytical body paragraph into your essay. My advice, when somebody asked me about it this morning, Matthew, I told him I would insert an analytical body paragraph after a paragraph where you felt like you really needed to dig more into what you said. So, for example, if I kind of mention the emotional force of a writer, maybe I brought up a couple of words he used, but I felt like I didn't really go very deep into it. I'd want to follow that paragraph up with an analytical body paragraph, because then, because of the structure of it, I'm forced to bring in more material from that speech or that piece of writing and these evidence sentences to really build my case about why I saw the particular emotional impact in the speech or the piece of writing that I did. Okay, so that's our crash course review. Okay, so now let's practice one. So we got this, is goth dead? If you don't know what goth is, it's something that was really popular in the 90s. It was like a music subculture movement. And this guy is trying to argue that it's not. Sheldon James, okay? So he calls himself a traditional goth in Colorado. If you look at his name, he's a mortician. Okay, so this is his argument in defense, in his answer to it, which is that goth isn't dead. Okay. Goth in general never actually died. It only went underground due to the majority of goths at the time growing up later on and thinking that goth is nothing more than a mere phase. Not only that, but the emo culture appealed to more people than goth did. Okay, so we'll stop there. This morning in my lecture, if you weren't there, that's fine, but this morning in my lecture, what I said we should do first is take apart the rhetorical analysis claim that the author's making. It should be the first thing we do when we're kind of compiling our notes before we write. So up here on my note page, right in the middle, I'm just going to give it a little title, or how about we will say, goth isn't dead. And then below this, I'm just going to write the word notes, and maybe underline it. Okay. So I'm going to say, what is his name, Sheldon James. Going to go ahead and note the, don't want to underline everything. I'm going to note the author's name, Sheldon James, and then I'm just going to start typing out his rhetorical analysis claim. Remember in class, that's the observation the person's making, the why that they're laying out, and the how. Oops. Don't know why that didn't work. Okay, there we go. And the how. So observation, why, and how. So Sheldon James in this first little paragraph starts out, most of it is observation. He is making a claim about why it's not dead, but we're going to treat this as an observation because it's not a finely technical piece of work. I would not call this an excellent piece of writing, but this is the kind of writing you're going to encounter mostly online. So we'll deal with a non-excellent piece of writing. So let's just say that his observation is that goth didn't die, it just went underground because of the aging goth subculture. So that's his observation. Goth didn't die, it went underground because of the aging goth subculture. Okay, and I'm assuming I'm going to leave this in my notes too. I'm going to say I'm assuming that what he means is that goths got too old to be seen in public, something like that. Okay, so it seems like that's something like that seems to be what he's saying. So that's his observation. I'm going to put that in bold so we can tell what I'm doing. So what's his why? Why is he even writing this? Why does he think this? Okay, so let's read on some more. Although it can be a phase for many, goth is actually a lifestyle, a life choice, and is a subculture. Even today, there are goths known as elder goths that began the goth style when goth itself started during and after the post-punk era. He said goth a lot. Please don't mimic him. That's a lot of repetition. Many of these elder goths are around 40 plus years old, try 50 plus, keeping it original yet finding new and interesting additions to the subculture. An example of goth never dying is, well, myself. If it truly died, I'd most likely be an emo or something else. And I'm so old I don't even know what an emo is. Okay. With that said, there are still goth bands around to this day, both old and new. The new artists try to mix goth and modern together, creating a synth-like genre that fits within the goth genre. The old ones are mainly just replaying their songs on tours, but some bands are still, all caps, cranking out new tracks and even albums. However, actual goth is at an all-time low at this rate. You have all sorts of different groups that mix or attempt to mix goth and another culture, causing more and more goths to stray away from original goth. Sometimes it works out well, like the Victorian goths, vampiric goths, pagan goths, and so on. As for the others, like pastel goth, new goth, and the like, aren't doing so well. By aren't doing so well, I mean not doing well and truly representing what goth is about. But generally, neither goth itself nor goth music are dead or have ever died. Both simply went underground. Okay, so we're going to have to kind of piece together his why, because he doesn't come out and tell us. His why, though, in answering this is he is personally vested. He says he is a goth himself. So his why is something like, James, we're going to use his last name. Remember, you mentioned an author by first name once, and then throughout the piece you only use their last name. So James, let's see, identifies as goth, and he clearly is invested personally in the idea that goth subculture, is alive and well. Despite appearances. Okay. And I'm not really clear overall, and that's okay if I'm not clear that he's got a stronger why. I'm not clear he does, though. He's not spelled it out here. Maybe I'll even make note of that. Here, I'll put in italics. Not sure he has a stronger why. And that's something that can actually go into your analysis. Like when you're criticizing something, you can note that, well, a strong piece of rhetorical analysis, or a strong piece of rhetoric, which is what we're treating this as. A strong piece of rhetoric clearly lays out the why and the how at the beginning. And if he doesn't, then that goes into your criticism of it. Okay, so maybe I'm going to save that as a criticism later when we start writing. All right, so now to his how. How is he going to prove this? Well, we can look down through here. He doesn't tell us in advance, right? Because it's not a well-structured piece of writing. But whenever we read the whole thing, like we just did, we can see, well, he's going to tell us that goth is a multifaceted thing. It's a multifaceted cultural movement with roots in various musical genres and styles. This makes goth harder to identify than it was in the 90s. But an eye for subtlety, we'll put it that way. What can I spell? Eye for subtlety, okay. One can readily see that it's still alive and kicking. Okay, there we go. So maybe that's his how, something like that. Okay. So we've got the start of our notes here. We've got his rhetorical analysis claim. We kind of had to put it together for him because this is not a neatly laid out piece of rhetoric that he's got here. It's just a core answer. Okay. So once we got that stuff, the stuff I didn't cover for those of you who saw the lecture today, and those of you who will see the lecture when I share it with you, the one thing I didn't cover because we'd already covered it a lot was once you've got the kind of structure of what he's doing with his rhetorical analysis claim laid out, I'm going to put that over here. This is his, rhetorical analysis claim. That's what we're doing here. Once you got this laid out, we still need to look at, we still need the tools for evaluating how persuasive he was, which is where we need to talk about ethos, logos, and pathos. Now remember, I've said this before, and not everyone's taking my advice on it, but I really want you to. Instead of using the word ethos, I'm using those as shorthand because they're useful shorthand. But instead of using the word ethos, I want you to talk about the credibility of the speaker or writer. And instead of talking about logos, or instead of using the word logos, I want you to talk about the writer or speaker's reasoning. And instead of pathos, I want you to talk about how the writer or speaker appeals to emotion. Let's say how they appeals or fails to appeal to emotion. Because I don't want you to feel like you have to look and look until you found something that's emotionally appealing, because sometimes writers and speakers fail on that count. Okay, so ethos. Next thing we want to look at now. I'm going to kind of lump these together here. Modes of persuasion. Let me just write that above here. So now we need to look back at the essay and start picking at how he does these three things. Okay, well, ethos, one of those is obvious. He himself is goth, that's what he's saying. Seems to be saying he's one of the 40 plus original goths. So I'm going to put my notes in kind of sloppy form up here, and we can just fix it as we write. So he tells us that he's an elder goth, or at least implies he is. I'm going to put that in. Okay. And so he's been around enough to know a thing or two about the subculture. Okay. So that's what we got for ethos. He also, though, he does demonstrate, we want to add to the ethos not just what he says about himself, but what he demonstrates about himself. So he also demonstrates a knowledge of the, let's say, the peculiarities of, I don't know, goth subculture in a number of its varieties. Okay, there we go. So all of that will go under ethos. His reasoning. This is where we start picking out his claims. What kind of claims is he making? Well, let's look. Goth didn't die. That's one claim. Goth never died. But it's, let's say, primary adherents aged, and so stopped being visible, I guess, being a visible presence at, I don't know, music venues and, I don't know, concerts. That's kind of the same thing, music venues and clubs. Okay, so that's one claim he makes. What's another one? He also says goth is a lifestyle, a life choice, and a subculture. Okay, goth is a lifestyle, a life choice, and a subculture. Okay. And what else did he say? Well, he proves that with the elder goth thing. Okay, so we're going to add that. His proof of this is the phenomenon of elder goths who police the. Well, I'm going to put this in sociological language, so I don't expect you to know this, but I'm going to say who police the norms of the group. In other words, they're on YouTube telling you who is and isn't goth. Okay. What's another claim? Let's see. There's still goth bands around today, and they're still active. Okay. There are still plenty of goth bands around today, and they're still, active. So that's another claim. And all sorts of mixed music, mixed fashions. Okay, so mixed music and mixed fashions. Okay. Also, let's say his final claim: goth has blended into other musical genres and fashions. Okay, there we go. So we got a bunch of his claims laid out. That's good because each of these claims can serve as a paragraph. That was kind of what I demonstrated in class this morning. Okay, so you'll see that whenever I share that lecture with you. So pathos. Pathos, where does he appeal to emotion? Well, he kind of does it in a cheesy way. He all caps a couple of words. So if it truly died, so we're going to note that. He brings across his, I don't know, brings across the emphatic nature of his, I don't know, what do you want to say, position? I know it brings across, no, I don't want to say the emphatic nature. He brings across his own passion for his position by utilizing a couple of all caps, put that in quotation marks, all caps words at key moments, on key points. I would say it that way, on key points. Okay. What else does he do? Never died underground. Do I see any emotion language in here? Appeal, not really. I mean, honestly, he's not that great on pathos. I mean, if I'm not interested in goth, he really didn't drum up my interest in this little piece. It's really more informative than it is emotional. So that's what I'm going to actually note here. The piece, piece is more informative than emotional. It's, well, I'm just going to leave it at that for right now. So now I have a bit for ethos. I'm going to bold that. Logos and pathos. Okay, so now we've got enough notes to start writing an essay. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to insert a page break. Oh, there we go. And we're ready to start writing. Okay, so I'm going to center this. Why goth isn't dead. And I'm going to give it a little subtitle just to look fancy. An assessment of, what was his name? I keep forgetting. Sheldon James. Sheldon James' defense of goth. Okay. Then I'm going to go over here. Okay. So one thing I want to mention, not everyone needs to hear this, but when you start paragraphs, you indent. So there we go. I tabbed over one. A lot of people aren't indenting properly on paragraphs, and they're not left justifying. This button right here is what I mean by left justify. Okay, that's centering. This is centering. This is bad unless you're centering a title. Okay, don't do this. Okay. So we don't want to center. What we want to do is go up to our buttons here and left to justify. So it's on this side of the screen, then you tab. And that's where a paragraph should start. So I'm going to delete this because we don't need it. But make sure that your work is left justified. You can center titles, but that's the only thing that should be centered. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go up here and we're going to start with the rhetorical analysis claim, Sheldon James's, because remember, we want to have a they say, I say ethos when we sit down to write. That's our modus operandi. So I'm going to put this down here. I'm going to go over. Oops, why isn't my cursor working? There we go. So they say first, and then I say. So the they say here, the guy who's speaking is Sheldon James. We want to lay out what he says first before we even get into our analysis. So we're going to start with up here with his rhetorical analysis claim, how we kind of took it apart, because that spells out where he's coming from. So you know what? I'm just going to copy and paste. Start like this. Is that where it's supposed to be? Okay. Okay. And I need to retab because it didn't tab. There we go. And since I haven't mentioned him, I'm going to add a little bit now because it doesn't do just to stick with the way I wrote the notes. We need to say Sheldon James, a mortician from, how about we say a gothic or a goth mortician? A goth mortician from Colorado argues that goth didn't die. It went underground because the gate, it simply, so we want to put this in more conversational style, it simply went underground because of the aging goth subculture. We are going to take out my little note here for now. Let me put that back up here. Oh no, it is up here. Okay, so we're good. I'm going to highlight that to remind myself that I didn't use that, so I might want to come back to that thought. So we come down, we insert the Y. Remember, this is our introductory paragraph we're working on right now. Oh, why does it keep doing that? Tab. There we go. James, yeah, James, because that's his last name. James identifies as goth. How about we just say, since we've already mentioned that he's a goth mortician, we'll just delete that bit and say James is clearly invested. I'm going to delete the is there. James is clearly invested personally in the idea that goth subculture is alive and well despite appearances. Okay. And since I'm not sure why, I'm going to actually phrase that to go along with what I'm writing here. So since I'm not sure what his bigger why is, I'm just going to kind of put that if he has a deeper impulse for writing on the topic, it is left to the reader to piece together. Okay. So we can already have a little bit of observation in there in our opening paragraph. Then I'm going to go down to my how here and copy and paste that. However that may be, I love these connecting phrases. I demonstrated a bunch in that lecture I'm going to share with you guys. I'm going to highlight that. I don't want you to highlight them in your paper. I'm just doing it so you can see what I'm doing. Okay. Connecting phrases are great because they're like the glue between your sentences. It keeps the thought smooth. So however that may be, goth, and I'm going to lower, oh, you know what, I uppercased it. I'll just uppercase it when we're talking about the movement. There we go. Goth is a multifaceted cultural movement. However that may be, James is clear that goth is a multifaceted cultural movement with roots in various musical genres and styles. This makes goth harder to identify than it was in the 90s, but with an eye for subtlety, one can readily see that it's still alive and kicking. Okay, good. So we've spelled out his argument there. So see, just like that, we have an introductory paragraph. What we don't have yet in this introductory paragraph is our engagement with James. We've laid out his position now, so that we've got all of this right here. I'm going to just highlight all of it for a second. His whole rhetorical analysis claim that we kind of put together, that's the they say. That's the he says. So now everything else is I say. It's what we say in response to him. Okay, so I'm going to go down and I need to tack on a claim I'm going to make about him that I then have to defend in the paper by the way that in the way that I analyze his writing. Okay, so maybe I want to say something simple in this one because it's not an especially complex piece of writing. It's an answer on Quora. So maybe I just want to say something like, well, James is a, let's say, is a knowledgeable defender of the goth scene. Oops, I always forget that extra E in knowledgeable. Is that right? Nope, sorry, oops, right there. Don't spell like I do. Okay, well, James is a knowledgeable defender of the goth scene. His writing lacks the passion to draw new converts. I'll just put it that way. Okay, so now we've got an introductory paragraph, and oops, I forgot I'm capitalizing goth here. We've got an introductory paragraph, and now I've got a claim here at the end that I need to go and defend in the rest of what I'm writing, right? So that's our claim. I'll put it in, I'll highlight it. Okay, so we know that's our claim that we're going to have to be defending in our writing. Okay, so paragraph 1, let's go up to, we took apart his logic piece by piece. So let's just use each of these sentences, or at least several of them, as a sentence to craft a paragraph from. So I'm going to copy that right there. And I'm going to paste it. Oops, there we go. I don't want that number 5 in there. I want this to all look like a paragraph. Tab, okay. There we go. So, and I don't want to just lay that out like that. So I've gone from, well, this is my final claim in my introductory paragraph. While James is a knowledgeable defender of the goth scene, his writing lacks the passion to draw new converts. Now let me just read right into the next one. Goth never died, but its primary adherents aged and so stopped being a visible presence at music venues and clubs. There's a connecting thought missing there. We go right from our claim about what we kind of think doesn't work in his essay to this claim about some bit of something he's talking about. So we need to connect those two. So let's say something like, since we want to connect our claims, this was the last thing we said, was the stuff in yellow. Let's say James's strongest point is that Goth never died, but its primary adherents. Okay, so there we have James's strongest point, and that in a way makes it a response to the claim we just made. So we're letting our readers know that we have this problem with James's response and that it kind of lacks emotional force. But we're going to lay out what his strongest point is. So see, it feels like the conversation is a continuation in this paragraph of what we set up in the introduction, and that's what you want to go for. Sorry, that bothered me. I just saw another place where I lowercase goth. Okay. Okay, so we've got this first one. We can say, so that's, we got a claim there. You know what, let's just do this one as an analytical body paragraph so I can show you how it's done. You don't have to do that in your first paragraph, but let me just do that so I can show you how to do it. So that's our claim for the paragraph. Now we need an evidence sentence. Where did he say this? Oh. Let's see. So we'll say, so James's strongest point is that goth never died, but its primary adherents aged and so stopped being a visible presence at music venues and clubs. For example, he intentionally raises the point about age. Where is that? I'm going to quote here. Noting that, and then I'm going to quote, paste. Oh, there we go. Let me paste. Let me make sure that all looks the same. Match destination formatting. Yay. Okay, there we go. These elder gods, and I'm going to capitalize that just to keep everything uniform. These elder gods are around 40 plus years old, and then I'm going to close my quote and continue, which signifies to his readers that the lack of public visibility has to do with age rather than the, let's say, liveliness of the scene, the goth scene. Here, let me put that in there just so I'm being clear. Okay, so this is my evidence sentence. Ignore that squiggly line. Bill Gates often does not know what he's doing whenever he notes things in Word. Okay. For example, so this is my evidence sentence. For example, he intentionally raises the point about age, noting that, quote, these elder gods are around 40 plus years old, end quote, which signifies to his readers that the lack of public visibility has to do with age rather than the liveliness of the goth scene. Okay. So nested quote, because about 2/3 of that sentence, as you'll remember from the lecture a few weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago, the 2/3 of this sentence is my words. I'm going to underline it. I do not want you to. I'm just doing this to show you, make it visually easy to tell what I did. Oops, that's also my words. Let me do this a little more accurately. Okay, and then I'm going to underline the rest of this. Okay, 2/3 of that sentence are my words, only about 1/3 is quoted material. That's what I mean by nested quotes. What this does, as I said when I originally lectured on this, is allows you to control the voice of the sentence. So if I read that all at one time, you wouldn't know it's two different people talking, although it is. It's me and it's Sheldon James. But because so much of it is my language, I control the voice of the sentence. So when we read it aloud, it goes, for example, he intentionally raises the point about age, noting that these elder gods are around 40 plus years old, which signifies to his readers that the lack of public visibility has to do with age rather than the liveliness of the goth scene. You see, all of that just sounds like one voice, which is what you're going for in those evidence sentences. Why I want you to practice nested quoting. Okay, I'm going to leave the underlines in there, even though, again, I don't want you to do that. So we have a claim and we have an evidence sentence. Now we need analysis. We want to expand on this in such a way that we're making it clear that it makes the point for the claim. So remember, our claim is up here in the first sentence. James's strongest point is that goth never died. Its primary adherents aged and stopped being a visible presence. Okay, so we don't want to just repeat ourselves, or it's going to feel like we're kicking a dead horse, but I want to say something like, James's assumption is a, I don't know, relatively uncontroversial one. Oops. That middle-aged people are less likely to be found among concert goers and club kids. All right. So that's just making it, that point wasn't really, he kind of leaves us to make that point. So that's me just making it a little clearer. Okay, that's just like that. You've analyzed it. You've elaborated enough to clearly connect it to the claim. So you need one more evidence sentence and one more bit of analysis. So let's see what we can do without just repeating ourselves. Because like I said, it's not a complex piece of writing, so repeating ourselves is a danger. Goth bands old and new. Okay, how about that? Creating synth-like genre that fits within the goth genre. Okay, dude. Actual goth is an all-time low at this rate. Okay, so he's distinguishing between actual goth and all of these new kinds. So let's say something about that. So let's just say something about the actual goth, because I think in a different paragraph we'd go into the other stuff about, because up here in our notes, I think one of his other claims is about how it's diversified, so we don't want to take good material for that. So how about we just stick with that actual goths idea. Actual goth is an all-time low. Okay. Or can we say something else about aging so we don't steal? This is the one downside to taking a really simplistic thing. Let's see. Emo culture, I have no idea what that is. When I Googled it, I couldn't tell the difference between emo and goth, so if somebody knows, you can tell me. Goths known as elder goths. Let's see. During the post-punk era. You know what? So I'm going to correct him. That's what we can do. Because post-punk means that the elder gods were actually older than me. I remember older kids on my street who were into goth. So elder goths would actually be closer to 50 than 40. So I'm going to just correct him on that point, and that's how we'll round this out. So I'm going to use a little bit more from this paragraph, and then that's how we'll round out our evidence sentence. Okay. So goth itself started during and after. What James doesn't seem to understand is that the problem of aging is more intense than he realizes, given that now I'm going to quote from him so I can use some quoted material. Given that goth itself started, I need copy and paste. There we go. Given that, quote, okay, now I need to key match destination formatting. Okay. Okay, what James doesn't seem to understand is that the problem of aging is more intense than he realizes, given that goth itself started during and after the post-punk era, which means aging goths, capital G, are actually closer to 50 plus, than 40. So see, I managed again. Most of this is my language, 2/3. I'm going to underline that so you can see. And then only 1/3 is quoted material. The other thing I would point out is that if I was actually quoting from a book, at the end here, there'd be some kind of in-text citation, right? So if this was a book I got this from, I'd use his last name and his page number, and then I put a period. This isn't a book, though. It's just a Quora post, so we don't have anything to cite, really. We could just do a little citation for the Quora post at the bottom, but there are no page numbers here or anything, so we're only interacting with one thing, so there's no need to cite it all throughout the paragraph. So one last little bit of analysis. Ultimately, then, perhaps James' concern with aging is a bit, I don't know, understated, and I don't know, might do more to undercut his appearance of knowledgeableness. Oh, I hate that word, knowledgeableness, good grief, than support it. Okay, there, my last little bit of analysis. There we have a rhetorical analysis, or I'm sorry, an analytical body paragraph. Claim, evidence, analysis, okay? So if we were to do another paragraph, I'm actually not going to do the whole thing since I'm already kind of demonstrating it, and I think this will go long and I'll lose your interest. But let's say I go up here and I look again at his logos to look for another paragraph to write about. It's a lifestyle choice. Do we want to do number 2? His proof is the phenomenon of elder gods. No, because we kind of just did that. Goth has blended. Let's do number 4. Goth has blended into other musical genres and fashions. Okay, so let's say we make that our paragraph number 3. And we don't want to start a paragraph with also because that's childish sounding. It doesn't really also doesn't connect your thoughts. We need a better connecting thought. Let's say something like the second most compelling point James makes is that Goth has not disappeared so much as it has, so we'll delete this stuff, blended into other musical genres and fashions. Okay, and then I would go through and I would use his article again to carve out more stuff. I wouldn't do it as another analytical body paragraph, but you can build another paragraph out of that. So I'm going to put that in italics. I'd go back to the Quora article and just engage with what I thought he was saying about this. Now, what I might have noticed is that I haven't really gotten into ethos, pathos, and logos. And I don't want to. I've gotten to logos. I'm sorry. I haven't gotten really into. And I mentioned pathos in my claim. I haven't really gotten into credibility except to mention that it undercuts, like down here, I'm going to undercut his appearance of knowledgeableness. So I'm going to highlight that. That kind of gets into his ethos. So I'm okay there. But I'd want to, if this is how I'm going to handle ethos, pathos, and logos, which is that I'm going to kind of just imply, I'm going to kind of stick it in various places in the essay, then that's fine because I'm doing it in a clear way. But if you're going to do it that way, if you're not actually going to talk explicitly about credibility and whatnot, just make sure that you're careful that what you're saying, because if I read a student said something like undercut his appearance of knowledgeableness rather than support it, I would know that they were talking about credibility. But just make sure that if you're going to plug in your discussion of ethos, logos, and pathos that way, that you're just really clear that that's what you're doing. Okay. So you'll notice I'm going to do ethos in this paragraph, I'm going to do pathos in this paragraph, and I'll do logos in this paragraph. Instead, I'm using the author's logos, his reasoning, to structure my response, right? I'm pulling these claims out of his reasoning, and I'm using those to craft my paragraphs. So that's how I'm responding to his logos. And then since I mentioned emotion as kind of like the main thing I'm addressing, then well, actually, I'm going to have to come back to that in an explicit paragraph anyway, but I've mentioned it in my claim here. So I'll put that down here as a note. I'll put it in italics since it's just a note. Since I mentioned emotional appeal in my major claim at the end of the introduction, I need to make an explicit paragraph about it, right? Because that's my big point. What I think I would do is do that as the conclusion. I think I'd return to this in the conclusion. The reason is that once I've laid out all these arguments for what he's doing and what I think he's doing well and what I think he's doing not so well, then I'd have set up a conclusion that, well, all in all, he kind of undercuts his knowledgeability a bit, but it is a knowledgeable piece overall for a little Quora response. But still, I can't go through and find anything to kind of pluck the heartstrings and make me excited about goth culture, right? So that'd be something I'd want to say in my conclusion. That sounds like a concluding thought to an essay where the claim is, while James is a knowledgeable defender of the goth scene, his writing lacks the passion to draw new converts, okay? So some of you have asked me about structuring your essay. This is the best advice I can give you on a college level. Take apart the person you're going to look at first. Do the rhetorical analysis claim, take apart his observation, his why, and his how, and just state those explicitly for yourself and make that the basis of your introduction, right? So this should become your introduction. Okay. Your introduction. Let me just make that clear. And then logos is a great way to structure your body paragraphs. Whatever you do besides that is kind of dictated by how your essay turns out, really. So I don't have stronger. I could tell you to do the simplistic structure, like intro, then ethos, then logos, then pathos, then conclusion. But that would only make a good essay on a high school level. That structure would never make a good college essay. So what you have to do is be in dialogue with your own notes. The note taking thing, I was telling my students this morning, it feels like that's adding a step, and so just putting more work on your lap for a paper. But without this note taking step, your essay will not be a college level essay. And I haven't been taking off a lot of points for quality so far. That's usually what I do after the midterm. But I will start taking off for quality ultimately, because you've got to get to where your essays aren't just kind of arbitrarily structured according to, intro, ethos, logos, pathos, conclusion, because you'll never get into the skin of what you're looking at. An essay has to be a dialogue you are having with your own thoughts about what you're reading, and then displaying that dialogue for people to look at. Like, this is why I wasn't convinced by this guy, or this is what I found convincing about him, and this is what I didn't find convincing about him, which is what I'm arguing here. It's actually the best kind of essay to write, what you did find convincing and what you didn't. Okay, so that's what I'm telling you. Go back up here, do your note taking, plus it'll make writing. I did this in what? I can't even tell how many minutes it's been, but it's not been a long time. If I sat down to finish this, it would probably take me an hour, because I had these notes to work from, right? Instead of taking me hours and hours and days, or instead of just taking an hour and just writing something off the top of my head that wouldn't even merit a C after the midterm. So just make sure that you are doing the note-taking process, and that you're building your papers from notes, okay? So good luck, guys. That's what I have for you here into the lesson. I'll see you soon.